Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Day 4 of this week of discussion on this very serious topic. Leah here, Wes and Leah, 1023 XLC, and it is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, which is why we are talking about it this week. And today, specifically, September 10th, is World Suicide Prevention Day. You guys, this is something that we need to be discussing. Yes, it can be awkward and uncomfortable, but not talking about it is not going to make it go away. So, wanted to try to cover everything this week, which is quite a bit. I think the main thing being it's okay to not be okay. What's not okay is not dealing with those things. So we've been talking this week about warning signs. Reducing the stigma. That's what this month, this week, this day is all about. How you can help, how you can get involved. Maybe you or someone you know has been affected by suicide. You can get involved. There are so many things that you can do, so many resources, so many people to reach out to. 1023xlc.com. You could get all of that information. You could also get and watch all of the videos that we've been doing throughout the week. But this interview in particular, I've been really looking forward to. We welcome Dr. Cortland Dahl to this week's discussion. How's it going?
It's, well, probably like everybody, it's a challenging time, but it's wonderful to be here with you. And it's so important that you're raising this topic for all of your listeners. So thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a little bit about yourself, because when I got the email about you and how you're just right up here in Madison, Wisconsin, I was like, man, and he's the voice of an app. Now, can you tell me a little bit about your title, who you are, what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I've had a very eclectic background that I'll try to summarize. Maybe just to say first that actually what brought me to the kind of work I've done throughout my life, which is really trying to understand the mind, well-being, mental health, and in particular, how we can cultivate mental health, how we can put ourselves in a position to be more resilient. This has been a really, really personal journey for me. I started about 30 years ago when I was just entering college, actually, had intense pretty severe social anxiety, even had a phobia of public speaking. It's one of the great ironies in my life that actually I do a lot of public speaking now.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. So, I used to get so worked up that one time I literally fainted in a choir concert when I was a teenager. I would get that freaked out. So it was not a minor thing in my life. It was pretty crippling, actually. So that really launched me on a journey that has led me around the world. I spent almost a decade living in Tibetan refugee settlements in Nepal and India. I ended up coming to University of Wisconsin here in Madison, got a PhD working in one of the leading neuroscience labs in the world. So the work that we do, as I mentioned a moment ago, and has really been at the focus of my personal life, but also the work we do scientifically, has really been trying to understand how we cultivate a healthy mind, how we can train our minds to be more resilient, and the science behind that. What's actually happening in the mind, the body, and even in the brain when we actually train ourselves to learn these skills that help us be our best.
So what we discussed about breaking the loop of negativity, I know personally that's something that I struggle with because I have obsessive compulsive disorder, which a lot of people think that means that my house is really tidy and that I keep things in like certain spots and I have to count and do. But really what it is, for me at least, is that I have these negative obsessive thoughts that enter my brain that I hold on to and I try to give some kind of purpose to, when really it's just a thought. So there is free mental health out there, mental health help out there. And something that you are a part of, that I mentioned you being the voice of, is that Healthy Mind Innovation.
Exactly. So my role, we have a center at University of Wisconsin called the Center for Healthy Minds, which is this research center that has been one of the leading research centers in the world that's looking at well-being and the cultivation of well-being. And then there's a nonprofit, which you have up here on the screen, Healthy Minds Innovations, which is really trying to translate all of the research that we've done at the center into practical tools that people can use in their lives. So in particular, we've designed what we call the Healthy Minds program, and it's freely available as an app. So if you just look for the Healthy Minds program in your app store, you can download it for free. It's totally free. There's no subscriptions or anything like that. We're a nonprofit, and we're really just interested in getting this stuff out in the world. So this actually has been the focal point of my work. I've been one of the voices in the app, maybe the main guide of the app, and designing the program over the past few years with this great team we have here in Madison has really been a focus for us as a team.
Now, because I've talked to people before and even myself before I tried meditation, because it was something that my therapist had suggested that I do try, that along with working out. She's like, meditation seems to help reduce the anxiety, depression. It helps with stress. And I'm like, I can't shut my brain off. Like, how am I ever supposed to meditate? But really, for somebody who's new to meditation, even if you can meditate for 5 seconds, like even if you can just sit down and try to do it for as long as you can, and then you build it up. Am I right there? Am I heading down the right track?
Yeah, you very much are. So right now, for example, if you just feel the sensations of your feet on the floor, or you feel the sensations of the air coming in and out of your nose as you breathe, you just meditated. That's it.
Yeah.
And what you said actually is so common. I if I had a nickel for every time I heard this from somebody, where people say, I tried to meditate, but my mind was just all over the place, and it's clearly just not for me. If our minds weren't all over the place, we wouldn't need to meditate.
Right.
It's the reason why these practices exist. When I first started meditating, which again was almost 30 years ago, I think for the first year I practiced, probably 2% of the time I sat down and tried to meditate, I was actually able to stay present and attentive.
Right.
What I didn't realize at the time is that there are many, many ways to meditate. We think about the most common one, which is mindfulness meditation, where you might sit, close your eyes, and pay attention to your breath. That's certainly one very powerful, helpful way to meditate. But you can meditate when you're going for a walk. You can meditate when you're doing the dishes. You can do an appreciation meditation while you're having a conversation like this. There are many, many ways to meditate. So what we've tried to do with the Healthy Minds program is just help people find ways into this practice that's going to work for them. So whether it's a sitting meditation or an active practice, whether it's mindfulness or something like appreciation, or even things related to purpose and meaning, there's many, many ways to do this. So I think we just want to help people find their way through this in a way that actually works for them in this really intense world we're living in right now.
Such strange times. I'm so glad you just said meditating while walking, because anxiety is something that I have dealt with my entire life. I remember having anxiety attacks when I was 7. It really goes back that far. But as far as the depression, it was the last couple of years that I really started doing that. So I was finding anything I could. I was throwing anything at the wall. I mean, yoga, meditation. I was seeing therapists. I still am. And I'm still doing the yoga and the meditating. But I remember mentioning on the air to Wes about how I did a meditation walk. And he's like, what? He's like, you're walking around with your eyes closed? I'm like, no, that's not what meditation is. There's all sorts of it. So I do think that there's some common misunderstandings, when it comes to meditating.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, meditation, simply put, is just training your mind. It's basically the same as exercise is for the body, meditation is for the mind. You are just intentionally doing something where you train your mind. So, if you just look around your room and intentionally notice something positive, right? You're just doing something intentional with your mind. And it could be something really simple, like you just notice a nice color. It doesn't even matter what it is. You just practice the skill of appreciation. You trained your mind. If you do that over again, if you do short moments of that throughout your day, that actually not only will change your kind of subjective mental inner experience, it'll actually begin to slowly change the way your brain functions. And that's what the research we do shows, that this stuff adds up. So maybe one thing to mention here, because it's kind of at the heart of why these kinds of practices work, is that the brain actually is constantly changing. It's actually built to change. Oftentimes we think that we're just kind of hardwired to be a certain way.
Right.
If I think back to all the anxiety I experienced, it just kind of felt like this is who I am. And it kind of felt hopeless, in that time.
Yeah.
Like, well, I was born this way. And unfortunately I got the wrong, set of cards in my hand, and here I am. But actually the brain is changing all the time. So there's always hope. It isn't to say it's easy. It takes time. It's just like training the body and exercising. It takes a little time, but we can very much make very real and lasting changes in our brain. And the brain's actually doing this all the time. It's just whether we're doing this intentionally or we're letting the forces around us kind of shape the changes that happen in our brain.
Now, you mentioned, how you are able to change the way that you think. And I remember at one point where it was like my brain was trying to tell me that I didn't want to change the way that I was thinking, that I wanted to stay that way. And I don't know if that's because I know it's not because that was true. That was just a thought. That wasn't an actual feeling. But I don't know if it's just because my brain this is easy. It's easy to just, it's going to take work in order to break that loop of negativity.
Yeah. What you just described is, I think, what everybody experiences, when we start learning about these things, especially when we start doing some practices like meditation, is the power of habit.
Right.
It's just, we've built up these habits over time, and there's a momentum to them. And even if we're suffering, even if we find them challenging, there's just the sheer momentum of that habit energy. And again, that's totally natural. One of the key things, again, from a scientific perspective, is that, our bodies, our biology, our brains did not evolve to be happy.
Right.
We evolved to survive. And for most of human history, we survived by being really, really good at detecting threats.
Okay.
Right. That's what kept our ancestors alive when they were, foraging, out, in the forest. So in this day and age, we don't have the same kind of threats, but our biology responds as though we have these, physical existential threats. In reality, it's, somebody says something harsh, or we're listening to a news story, and our biology is responding as though we're physically threatened, and it gets the stress response. It starts triggering this loop in our minds that you described. So that's completely natural. So if you just think about that biology in this current environment, and simply what we're always hearing, for example, if we just turn on typical newscasts and we're just hearing about politics, the pandemic, forest fires, it's programming us to be afraid, anxious, and hopeless. If you just look at it from that point of view, it's the most natural thing in the world, but we can actually do things to somewhat push back on that a little bit.
Well, and that was what I was going to say, like the timing of this week's discussion too, with the pandemic. And I mean, that's been going on for 7 months or 10 years. It feels like forever sometimes, but people that are experiencing, this loss and hopelessness and anxiety, depression for the first time, and not really knowing what to do with those feelings. What are, with meditation, what are some other practical strategies?
Yeah, I would say the first thing to realize is that all the challenges that we're all facing, and it's a little different for everybody, but if it's feeling much worse right now than it may have a year ago or 10 years ago, that is completely normal. Basically, what has happened is the pandemic and all these economic health issues, all these things that have happened have basically removed from our lives a lot of things that oftentimes help us be more resilient. And things were not so great before this, right? I mean, we were already having
There's already stuff
levels
going on.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like we were just in some, Shangri-La prior to this.
I wish.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, anxiety and depression were already at epidemic proportions. So the key thing is first to see that that's very normal. If that's what you're experiencing, not only is there nothing wrong, like that actually is quite predictable given what we're all facing on a day-to-day basis. But the other thing to realize is that there are very simple things you can do. I think reaching out for help is maybe the first, most important thing. So having a number here on the screen and, looking looking for people who actually have expertise, mental health professionals, especially if it's really extreme. If you have suicidal thoughts or really deep depression or anxiety, really reaching out and not being afraid to do that. That's a really critical first step. In addition to that, there are some very, very practical things we can do and practices we can learn that actually just take a moment to do. You don't need to pay any money to do them. You don't need to go to the gym. You don't need to, make some huge lifestyle change. But one very, very simple one is taking a moment to simply tune into what you are feeling in the moment. And the critical thing about this is not to change it, not to push it away or try to get rid of whatever thoughts and feelings, but actually to bring a little openness and just to say, hey, this is what I'm feeling right now, to kind of get out of the loop of trying to avoid challenging feelings and emotions. It's really actually difficult to do this. I don't want to kind of make it sound like this is super easy. When I was experiencing anxiety and I was reading about this, I was like, are you crazy?
Wow.
What are you talking about? I've been trying to get rid of these feelings for years, and now you're telling me just to feel them?
Right. Well,
that's the starting point.
I do, one of the therapies that I do specifically is ERP, if you're familiar with that. So that, trying to explain it to anyone who is close to me, they're like, what are you actually doing? Because I'm exposing myself to the things that I had been avoiding and then taking the compulsion away in order to get rid of that obsessive thought. So it is quite the same for anxiety. You have to face, the more that you avoid something, it's not going to make it go away, which is another reason why we are discussing suicide prevention awareness, because I think a lot of people are uncomfortable talking about that. They're uncomfortable talking about their mental health. And it's okay to feel your feelings and not be okay, especially now.
Yeah. I mean, you can think of, just to emphasize what you were saying, you can think of the resistance we often feel towards our own thoughts and emotions as being an amplifier of suffering. Like, we have a certain amount of pain just by being human, right? Like, we get sick, we're going to have, difficult feelings and thoughts and whatever from time to time. That's totally normal, especially at a time like this. It's completely predictable. But when we try to avoid all of that, and there's really good science behind that, actually is not only not helpful, it tends to even amplify the suffering and the quality of just being overwhelmed by it all. So in addition to just bringing some awareness and openness and acceptance to what our inner experience is in the moment, another thing we can do is to realize that oftentimes when our mind is in a loop, when we've been listening to the news, or, we've got some kind of thoughts churning through our mind, this experience that we've all had where we're lying in bed at night and you want to go to sleep and the mind just won't shut off. Even the simplest thing, just to fall asleep, is difficult. So when that's happening, to recognize that in that state, our mind is like a magnet for focusing on negative things, right? It's like there's a filter in front of our eyes that just filters out the good stuff, and all we see is the negative. Yeah. So the first is just to see that, what is my mind kind of pulling me towards in this moment? And then to intentionally notice something positive. And just to make this a habit, treat it like a skill that you just practice in simple ways. So every time you think of a person, or every time you interact with a person, or even just walk into a room, just make a habit of noticing one good thing, right? It just takes a moment. It's the simplest thing in the world. But the more you do that, that slowly shifts the balance away from being focused on the negative to something positive. And it's not positive thinking, because you're not like, I wish this good thing would happen in the future. It's orienting to the good things that you have already in the moment, which is oftentimes what we don't see.
Living in the moment is probably one of the hardest things that I had to learn how to do. And it's like practice what you preach, because I'm constantly, telling my dad specifically, I'm like, you need to ground yourself and be in the present moment. But I feel like just the life that we're all living right now, it's kind of like we're on autopilot and we're just trying to get through one thing. And while we're doing that one thing, we're thinking about the next 17 things that we have to do and how we're going to get to those things. It's like you said, it's not easy. And also we want that instant gratification when it's something that's, you're not going to see right away, I feel like people either lose sight in the fact that it can change, or they just give up.
It's so true. One of the most striking research findings from the past decade was from a team at Harvard that I think it was 3,000 people that they did the study with. Essentially, what they found is that roughly half the time we are not paying attention to what we're doing and who we're with. And it doesn't matter what we're doing, whether we're sitting alone, we're with other people, we're working, we're at home. Half of our waking lives, we are thinking about the future, we're dwelling on the past, and all of that projecting into the past and future basically sets in place kind of a habit of feeling unsatisfied with the present, right? Where we just almost get habitual. We develop a habit to not see what's right in front of us. But again, the good news, that's kind of, can be a little depressing even to hear that. The good news is we can train ourselves. The brain is built
It doesn't have
learn
to be this
to
way.
be more attentive, for example. So you can easily learn simple strategies to shift that.
And again, we are talking to Dr. Cortland Dahl, or I could call you Court now, right? We're on that nickname basis. Research scientist at Center for Healthy Minds, and also part of Healthy Mind Innovation. Now, that app, again, I will be posting that up. And we've got a lot of good comments here, but if anybody does want to ask Dr. Court any questions, we will have time to get to those. Now, as the voice of the Healthy Minds free meditation app, what different, I'm just trying to see what kind of guidance I will be looking forward to hearing. Like, are you just, saying like happy little lines or, quotes? I mean, what can people expect?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in the Healthy Minds program, it's a step-by-step guided path that just takes a few minutes a day. You could do it in as little as 5 minutes a day. And there's basically two main activities. There are what we call learn lessons. So little short lessons, they're about 5 minutes long, that really feature a little bit on the science, not any kind of heavy neuroscience or anything like that, but a little bit of what we're learning scientifically, and really talking a bit about how these different practices that are taught in the Healthy Minds program work, some of the important principles behind them, and oftentimes some real world stories. Sometimes they're my stories or other people, how they've applied them in their lives and the difference they can make, that sort of thing. So these very short podcasts are part of it. And then the real heart of it is really the practice. So there are meditations, and there's hundreds of them. I mean, there's really tens of thousands of minutes, if you add it all up, of guided meditations. But again, it's very step-by-step, very user-friendly. And the practices are essentially guided exercises, guided meditations, you could say, that sort of walk you through learning simple skills and how to apply them in daily life. So for example, it might be something on mindfulness. So it might say, all right, we're going to use a few different ways of being attentive to the breath and use that as a way to strengthen our ability to be fully present. And the point isn't the breath, it's so we can really strengthen that capacity. So when we're at the dinner table, or we're getting work done, or we're lying in bed at night, we just want to go to sleep, we know how to get back and to just be in the moment rather than pulled into our thoughts helplessly. The important thing about the practices, I should say, and this is one of the things that I would say is quite unique about the Healthy Minds program app, is that you can choose every practice to do either as a sitting meditation or as an active meditation that, again, you could do while you're going for a walk, as you said, or doing the laundry, or falling asleep at night. In fact, the sleep meditations are some of the most popular ones in the app. So you can do it. There's lots of options. People can kind of customize it in ways that works best for them.
That's awesome. I know that I'm going to be downloading the app now. I can't even tell you all the other ones that I had tried. But again, for me, I have a very busy brain. I'm always thinking about what's going to happen, what could happen. Most of the time, these things are completely out of my control. So why I'm even wasting my time thinking about it in the first place, I don't know. But when I first started meditating, I just want to recap that it does take time. And if you are able to do so for a couple seconds and then work your way up, that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, it's easier than you would think. I think a lot of people can be a little intimidated when you first hear about it. It kind of feels like we should already, be on top of things before we start. But I think everybody, I've taught meditation to many, many, many people all over the world, and everybody, when they sit down, they start seeing how distracted the mind is. It can be really, really difficult, but the benefits really, really add up, and it doesn't take long to see those benefits. Another cool thing about the app is that it's based on a scientific model of well-being that we developed at the Center for Healthy Minds. And the reason that's important is because there are different dimensions of well-being. We refer to them as the 4 pillars of well-being. And each of them has different kinds of practices and meditations you can learn. And different people benefit from different approaches.
Right.
So some people are really gravitate to mindfulness, awareness, attention practices, and that works great. Other people are much more interested in things that are more along the lines of purpose, meaning, and values. And there's meditations you can do to strengthen that sense of purpose. There's other practices that relate more to appreciation and kindness, our ability to empathize with others, and yet more that relate more to what we call insight. Right. Just really self-inquiry and getting curious about our own minds and how they work. So there's many different forms of practice. And again, it's a step-by-step program, but people can customize it in a way that works for them.
Well, like mental health experiences and mental health treatment, one size doesn't fit all. So, sometimes it can take a couple different options, trying out a couple things, or as I say, throwing things at the wall and seeing whatever sticks.
Exactly.
But like you mentioned, and Sharon just commented, yes, the mind is like a muscle that you can build up. And, you go to the gym, you start working something out. You're not going to see the muscle, boop, right away. However, we do want that instant gratification, and sometimes we just have to remind ourselves that it does take time. Now, Ronald asked, will this help veterans with PTSD, MST, and bipolar and anxiety? Do you work with people that experience those things?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ronald. It's a great question. We've actually done research in our lab with veterans, specifically with PTSD, and there's been other work by other research centers. And the short answer is that these kinds of practices can make a huge difference. It's also important to note that with any of these mental health concerns, that it's very important to also be, doing this in conjunction with other experts, any other mental health support, that people may be getting. But there's definitely a lot of evidence to show that these practices can make a huge difference, not only for how we feel mentally, but really to begin to rewire the stress biology of our bodies. And a lot of it has to do with what you were saying, Leah, the way we relate to all the flood of thoughts that are coming up in the mind. What usually happens is we start thinking, we kind of have some loop of thoughts that starts moving through the mind. That gets emotions going. And then there's this sort of self-reinforcing loop. When you bring some of these practices into the mix, when you bring awareness and you start, instead of getting consumed by those thoughts and feelings, you can step back and observe them. Or you do things like practice self-compassion or kindness, insight, or some of the other practices I mentioned. It basically changes that whole cycle, and it breaks that loop of negativity. And that actually changes the way the brain is functioning. That in turn shifts even the way the body is responding, and the activation of all the basically these networks in the body that make us feel stressed out. So it's anybody can do this. I really can't emphasize enough. It seems like this big thing, but actually it's not necessarily easy, but anybody can get started even with a few minutes a day. So I would definitely recommend giving things a try and finding something that works for you.
Awesome. Well, as you said, hminnovations.org. You could go there on your phone. You can download the app from your app store and try it out. I mean, it's not going to hurt. That's when I got to that point where, because I waited too long. I waited too long. I didn't recognize that, I was struggling. And then I was like, I was in therapy. I ended up having to take medication. Just to get me out of that funk. And then I was able to start doing the things like meditation and yoga and working out, and got myself to a place where I felt like I could put forth more effort than not that I wasn't able to, but I was just struggling to. So, Court, I really do appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us today. I have all of your links, all of your work, because you really are, you have many different things that you do. And I appreciate all the work that you are doing as far as mental health goes. Those links are on our website over at 1023xlc.com. And then this video will also be posted over there as well for anyone to rewatch, get that help out to somebody if you know somebody that does need it, or if you yourself need it. So again, really appreciate you sitting down and talking with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.